I think a lot of us who come into this field come from a personal place, and I was wondering if you would share with us how you got here. What was it that in your life that inspired you?
Yeah, it's like the most common question because people are like, "How on earth did you end up being?" I mean, I started the company when I was 28. A 28-year-old focus on death is not a common occurrence, I guess. But
I was working
I,
in hospice when I was 28, and people were like,
yeah,
"What?"
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, I've been like pretty aware on some level of the real profound effects of death and loss and grief since I was in second grade. My dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was in kindergarten and then was on sort of hospice care and life through second grade and ended up passing away when I was in fourth grade. And so ended up being just my mom and I, and I was just very keenly aware and conscious of time because of that, which is kind of, I think, unusual probably for a 9-year-old of just starting to think about like, what am I doing with my life? It's like at my first like life crisis of, how am I going to spend my time? What do I want to do? And that, translated throughout high school into college. I was always just really actively trying to find um, companies, work, organizations, whatever it was, that was really fulfilling, that would help other people, that would drive forward conversations about things we're not comfortable with. I started working in dating abuse and domestic violence work, transitioned into mental health and crisis support, and then into sort of end of life and death planning. But Lantern itself was inspired actually by my grandmother. She passed away a couple of years ago and was my dad's mom. So I was responsible for everything with her, kind of caregiving, end of life, all the planning, and was really actively looking for something like Lantern. When she passed away, I got to her nursing facility in Connecticut, and there were two police officers, a nurse, and her body, and they looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I was a kid, but also I don't think anybody really knows how to answer that question in those situations. I immediately pulled out my phone and I Googled, "What do you do when someone dies?" Because I was that
Wow.
clueless. And this is someone, I mean, she was 96 years old. Like, it's not like her death was a shock in any way. It was just, I didn't even think of what happened after that point. What do I do? What is expected of me? We were just kind of in the momentum of the experience of her end of life, and assumed Lantern already existed. I mean, there's a single point solution for literally anything you could ever imagine. It's like getting married, having a baby, buying a car, choosing a credit
Right.
card, choosing a college, whatever. And then for the one thing that impacts every person on the planet, it was just extremely fragmented. It was super expensive. It was mostly offline. And the user experience and the design is, often lacking when you find these digital solutions. And so I saw something that I really thought I could help with.
Wow. I have so many thoughts and comments. So when my mother died when I was 18, and I'm an only child, and my father had had cancer already, so I knew that he wasn't going to. And he was also much older. I knew he wasn't going to see me turn 30. There was a lot of anxiety for me. My mother had largely been unable to face her death emotionally, just really talking about it. So it was a difficult one for her, for all of us. My father had a totally different way of being in the world. And he really embraced his end of life. And I was his caregiver because I was the only child, and I was the person who was there with him in hospice. But I was 24 years old, 25 years old when he died. And as he was getting sicker, he started doing things like taking me to the bank with him and putting me on all of his accounts. He started just putting a lot of things in place. And there was one moment in particular when he sat me down at the kitchen table and he said, "Okay, here's a piece of paper and a pen. I want you to start making a list of everything you have to do when I die." And I was like, "What? No, are you kidding? This is horrible." I was crying. I was like, "We are not talking about this." And he really pushed me to do this. And so I sat there. I mean, I still have the piece of paper, and it still has tear stains on it, and it has this list of things: how many death certificates to order, who to call first, reminders to call Social Security, like the mortuary, writing an obituary, all these things, right? And it's incredible because when he did die a few weeks later, in that moment, you're so shocked. And even when it's someone it's going to happen. And I went and I got the list. And I just had this profound gratitude for him for having done this with me. And it felt like the last parenting gift, like he was still parenting me through his own death. which was just so beautiful. But it's enabled me to feel very strongly and passionately about end of life planning and how that's something we all need to be doing. And especially in this last year, I think we've seen that more than ever, right? I think most of us go around under the illusion that we have all the time in the world, or we don't need things when we're young and healthy. And I think a pandemic is a great reminder that yes, we do, but also just in general, we should always be doing this. So tell me more about like what it's been like for you to kind of go into this realm and this idea, and how you've seen our culture handle it.
Yeah. Well, first, just want to say, like, I mean, incredible that sort of experience you had with your father. And it also is just like mind boggling to me that what he had you do is what our post loss product is. I mean, it is quite literally a step by step guide to, right? The second someone dies, what do you do? Moment 1, moment 2, day 3, day 4, week 5, month 6, all the way out. And it is exactly that. It was, really just me realizing like I didn't have that list on hand, and how can we create that so every person, when they're in that moment of like, what am I supposed to do right now, they can find everything in one place and kind of walk alongside. So we basically productized exactly what your dad did for you, which is really incredible, because I haven't heard many people kind of do that on their own. So that's
He was a very pragmatic, practical guy, an engineer,
Yeah.
but it's really a gift, it is such a gift for our loved ones to do this for us and to do this with us.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's so much of what our users tell us too, is, when we ask, why are you doing this? Why are you creating an end of life plan? The word gift comes up over and over and over again. It's a gift for my sister. It's a gift for my husband. It's a gift for my child. It's really like the last way to say I love you to someone, is I've thought about you and your experience and how you're going to navigate this. And it's
100%.
It's a really powerful thing.
But there's a lot of fear around it for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Well, I do like to remind people that doing an end of life plan does not make you die faster. Like there's a lot of superstition, I think, around that. It's like, if I think about it, then it comes.
I think that's an interesting part of it. It is superstition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is. And so much of what, the work that we have to do is normalizing those conversations and making people realize that it's a gift. It's totally fine and normal to do. I mean, the way we kind of look at it is very much how life insurance happened, right? Like now when you get a job and your employer says, here's your life insurance, you don't like bat an eye and say, oh my God, do you think I'm going to die? Like, you're just like, oh yeah, life insurance policy. Totally. Like, this is what we do. And so now just trying to shift that concept into thinking also about end of life planning in that similar way. Like, this is just something that we do.
When is, like, if we were going to change the culture and everybody really did start doing end of life planning when they're young and healthy, like when should that happen? Like after college, like in college, like, I mean, when do we do that? When is, and what is the setting? Like, should this happen in schools? I mean, should our parents be teaching this? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I say 18. I mean, that's when you can legally, have a will and do all those things. The earlier you do it, the better. Because I will say, aside from anything else, like, obviously getting used to and getting into a habit of updating and taking care of these things, but also it is way more pleasant to do an end of life plan when there isn't any kind of sense of urgency or fear where something is about to happen. If you're trying to do an end of life plan and you've had a diagnosis or someone you love is dying, like it is stressful and chaotic and all around unpleasant in every which way. If you're doing your end of life plan and you're healthy and you have no reason of thinking that there's anything coming your way, you can take time to really think about what it is that you want and to explore different options and to identify maybe eco-friendly burials or unique things that you can do as mementos for your family members, or you can write letters or pick songs that'll make your daughter laugh. Like there are so many things that you can do if you are able to take the time.
Yeah. And like you and I, having lost parents, I think that there's so much we can think of that we wish they had left for us. I have 3 kids, and I'm constantly creating little things that will be there when I'm gone, that they'll uncover or come across, just in all of my stuff that I hope makes them feel good or gives them a laugh or things like that. But I don't think that's something most people are thinking about. I do it out of anxiety. I'm afraid
Yeah.
of dying and leaving my children as happened to me. So I'm always kind of thinking about it through that lens. Um,
Yeah, I think when you lose somebody close to you, especially when you're young, you think more regularly about how you'll leave your mark when you're gone. And I found it interesting because with my dad, he didn't have a whole lot in order. But he did talk openly about the fact that he was dying. I knew in some capacity that he was. But as I got older, I started to realize that he had written his name in so many of his belongings. And
Mhm.
so like I'll find it in books, I'll find it in albums and CD covers and magazines that he had that, we saved in different boxes. And I'm like, I open a book and I'm like, oh, my dad's name is in here. Like he just would sign things. And I think that was sort of like that was his way of saying like, I'm still here, I'm still with you. Like
That's so
you
sweet.
touch the same thing.
Mhm.
But on the flip side, like, we're part of what I'm really working on with Lantern, and I would say we're at the beginning of the journey there is how to sort of encapsulate that and allow people to share their stories, share their voice, share their photos, and keep everything in one place. We do
So what
ask.
have you created? Like what, if someone goes to Lantern and wants to begin doing end of life planning, what do you have there? What are the first things we do with end of life planning?
Yeah. So we have it divided into different categories. So there's, sort of the obvious things like, legal and financial considerations. So like, do you have a will? Do you have kids? Do you have guardianship paperwork, or do you have your advanced care directives? Then we do things like possessions and accounts. So do you have your passwords stored somewhere that they have access to? Do they know what subscriptions you have? Do they know where any like particular important possessions are placed? And then we have the history and legacy side of things. So we actually have like a bucket list feature. So you
Awesome.
can list and track all of the things that you want to do. And then also allow people to kind of carry on the things that are left and to see what you've done. And then we
Awesome.
have questions around like common questions that people typically want to know or have written down. You could add anything you want, but we ask things like, if you have a spouse, describe how you met. What are like your three biggest life lessons? What's your funniest memory of getting in trouble as a kid? Like, things where you think back and you're like, oh, I really wish I knew that about my mom or whatever it is. And that really gets to me because I don't have any recording or anything of my dad's description of meeting and proposing to my mom. And my mom tells me the story, and I'm like, I always think every time I hear it, I'm like, I wish I knew his perspective. Like, what did he feel when he met her? What did he feel when he proposed to her? And if I could have that in writing or
Oh
video, it's
yeah.
like making me tear up thinking about it. I'm like,
Oh,
that's such an
I
incredible thing
know.
to give to your kids.
You're making me tear up now. It really is. So if someone were to create like a really robust end of life plan, what's the like how long does that take? Do you work on this in bits and pieces? Do you like hammer it out? Like what, I mean, I guess either, but
Yeah.
what does that
Yeah,
look
I mean,
like?
it definitely depends on your personality type. There are certainly people that they sit down and they spend the entire weekend and they're just like, I just want to get this done. I want to get it all in one place. Like, I'm dedicating myself to it. I think most people take it in bite-sized pieces, and we're actually working on developing Lantern to be more conducive to that,
Mhm.
so that you can answer questions at a high level. So, like, do you have a will? Yes or no? And
Mhm.
like, just start there, and
Yeah.
then you can come back and say, okay, no, I don't. Let's figure out how to get it. Yes, I do. Let's make sure it's stored in the right place, and just allow people to feel like they're making progress and that things are starting to get in order, because it can be overwhelming. I mean, there
Yeah. That's
are
good thinking.
many
Like,
things to do, and you have to. It was funny. I was actually doing a talk with a company we work with, and somebody raised their hand. They were like, I just wish that someone would put 30 minutes on my calendar every week so I could work on this. And I'm like,
yeah.
you can do that. Like, but it's like, sometimes it's hard to motivate yourself to do it. It's like you want someone to be like, 30 minutes, go. You have to do this every Tuesday at 4 p.m. until you get through it.
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of different components, a lot of layers, and a lot of thought and a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
I really dug back into mine around this time last year with COVID, and I just hadn't really finished it. I had been chipping away at it for a while and gotten some of the important pieces in place, but I was like, okay, now I really have to get this done. And but the stuff that I had left was really a lot of the emotional pieces, and it was hard. I mean, I sat and I wept as I listed things that I want my kids to have or things I want my husband to know. I just really, it was very emotional, but then it felt very cathartic, and actually it was a way to decrease my anxiety, knowing that there's so much in place, and not having to worry about, what would happen if something does happen.
There's something incredibly freeing. Like I have a very clear memory. I mean, I haven't been on a plane in a while, but I have a fear of flying. I do it because I love to travel, but I have a fear of flying. And I remember feeling the shift from when I didn't have any plans in place to when I did. And I was like, okay, if this plane goes down, it's gonna be horrible, but I know that like I've taken care of what I need to take care of. And that it's a
Yeah,
very freeing feeling.
it really is. It's a totally different feeling. So two things I want to talk about. Like I want to kind of talk about this day and age and our digital footprint, and like how do we deal with that? I mean, I just the other day appointed someone on Facebook to deal with my account. You can do that on Facebook. There's a place you can go in your settings and you can appoint one of your friends to either turn your page into a memorial page or take it down or whatever. And so I did that. It felt kind of weird. My friend, I didn't even tell my friend I was doing it. She got like an email, I was like, sorry.
Like, you know something I don't know what's going on. Yeah.
But that's like one tiny thing, right? I can't even, I have so much digital life.
Mhm.
How do we, what's end of life planning look like around that?
Yeah. I mean, even just what you just said you did, the vast majority of people have not done. And we
Mhm.
really encourage that of thinking about, like, especially if you are somebody whose, business persona influence on social media is huge. I mean, that's a critical thing to do also for your business.
Mhm.
But yeah, we recommend that people have a clear list of what social media accounts they have. They have their passwords stored somewhere secure, so not written on the back of a book on a bookshelf, which is what someone recently
Right.
told me that they did. But somewhere that's secure, like a LastPass or 1Password, or one of those types of things. And those password um, uh, vaults, you can add a beneficiary for those too. So you can name somebody who can then have access to your passwords after you're gone.
What
Um,
happens if you haven't put this stuff in place? Like, what happens to all this stuff?
it's tough. It's really tough. So if so say I pass away tomorrow and I didn't tell anyone about any of my social media accounts. Um, you each account is different. Some have more hoops than others. But in short, you basically have to fill out forms, present a death certificate, have a pretty significant back and forth with the customer service on their side, and then they'll either close the account or put it into memorial state. Um, the hoops are there on purpose. I've spoken to some of the
Sure.
social media companies because they've said that like people will claim someone is dead just because they don't like what they're posting to try to get their account down. So you have to you have to
That
have
sounds
these
like a
kind of
Jerry
hoops.
Springer episode.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. But I mean, it is in the ecosystem of the extensive amount of logistical work that happens after somebody dies, layering on having to close. I mean, for some people, you're looking at 20 or 30 different accounts. You have all your social media, you have your subscriptions, you have your email accounts, your bank accounts, it goes on and on and on.
and I
Uh,
don't think we think about this very often, about what would happen, if we died tomorrow and who would have to deal with all of this and all the hoops they would have to go through. And I think for the person who's grieving, it's such an added layer of just sadness and hassle and like work when you really just kind of want to be resting and grieving. And instead you're like on the phone with Facebook,
yeah.
like,
And oftentimes people just don't do it because of that, which is why like there are so many accounts for people that are no longer living that are still there.
mhm,
And that in itself is a very triggering experience. Like I mean, I personally can speak to a good friend of mine passed away a couple of years ago, and nobody closed her LinkedIn account. And I get every year, my friends and I talk about it, we get pinged for a work anniversary, for her birthday, and it's just Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I was just on here to go look to find a contact. And now I'm like, all these memories are flooding back into mine because LinkedIn has pinged me about this. And so, it has long-term effects by not closing these accounts.
Wow. Yeah, just to emphasize, like this is a real gift to give to your loved ones, is to not make them go through this.
Mhm.
I'm going to ask you another question, but in the meantime, if you guys listening want to start putting in questions into the chat bar for Liz, we'll start turning towards those in a few minutes. Any comments, questions for her, questions for me, questions for Zubin, just because he's here today and that's exciting. So Liz, here's my big question. And then I think this is one of the big ones is, what do we do with people who don't want to do this? Like, my husband doesn't want to do this. He's married to a grief therapist and he doesn't want to do this work. I can't get him to like do this stuff. How do I get him to do that? Help me.
It's really, really tough. So I would say there's two things. So you obviously know his personality better than anyone, and typically you go one of two routes. There's like the realism route, which is just like, this is going to happen at some point, and we need to get these things in order, and this is what they are. And that's how my stepdad thinks. Like, when I think of like that person, my stepdad is like, by the numbers, very literal. It's like, okay, we know this is reality, get it done.
Mm-hmm.
The other personality type, I've like made personas of my family. My mom is the other personality type, which is, she's purely emotion driven. And so for her, it's much more of like, Mom, I would be completely lost if something happened to you. Like, I need your help in making sure that like I am not in a total tailspin. Obviously the grief will be more than anything I could bear on its own. And to also know that I have no idea what you would want will only just hurt me more. And that, I think, is what sticks with a lot of people, is like, do you want to add to the pain that I'm going to feel if something happens? And no, they don't. So yeah, those are the routes typically that tend to work. There are absolutely, like, unfortunately, there are just some people that they just won't. And it might be more of like peppering in questions from time to time. Like, my grandmother is that person. Neither of those were effective for her. And so I would just ask things like, what's your favorite music? Like, what are your favorite songs? Or, if, one day later on, if, if and when something happens, who are the most important people that you would want to be around? Like, and just like starting to learn over time these things, because no, you might not be able to get them to be like, let's walk through the details of your bank accounts, because that is just an awkward conversation, but you can at least know what they would want for a service, and the things that you might really be questioning, like, am I doing this right?
Yeah. I think for me, I might have to just like feed him this stuff in little bits and pieces, like you're saying, but like just pass things to him that I'd love for him to do. And the housekeeping team is here. I'm in a hotel again. So okay, we
started vacuuming around you.
I'll just mute myself. Marty asks, what plans are in place to protect and back up all the personal info that's stored on your site?
Yeah, so we actually have a security page on our site, so I'm not going to bore everyone with a list of how we secure everything, but we do have full backup systems. So, God forbid something goes down or disappears or gets deleted, we have everything backed up. You also can at any time download your plan off of our site. So if one day you decide, you know what, I'd rather just have this in paper format, you can do that. But yes, if you go, I'll put it, I'm pretty sure it's lantern.co/security, but I'll put it in there so you can see kind of all the different layers of security we have.
I'm curious how many of you listening have done this work. Has everyone done it? Do you guys have your end of life plans? Marty, a little bit. Nobody else? Okay, well, you're here today to start. What's the first thing everyone can do? Like, what's something everyone can do today?
I mean, first step, I from like a lantern perspective, create an account and look at it and just get a feel for what it's for. If you're like, digital isn't for me, I don't want to do it that way, I would definitely just say, like, starting to even just simply think about who is your person? Who is the person that you want to hold this information for you in whatever format it is? People often call that a beneficiary, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're giving them things. It's just somebody that you're like, okay, I've identified someone I trust who I will pass along all at once or over time information that they need to know for my end of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that person is important. And then having a backup as well, right? Like you kind of have to have two people um, in case of whatever, in case someone's even just too emotional to handle it or something like that. When I did mine, mine's kind of more of like a paper slash, I don't know, kind of it's kind of like a hybrid of online and paper. And so I sent it all to my best friend because she's so much more organized than my husband. I sent it to him too, but I just know that like if I were to go tomorrow, he wouldn't remember where he put any of it or what it was. Like he just wouldn't, you know. So I sent it all to my best friend because she's super organized and I know that
Yeah,
she'll
absolutely. And honestly, like we do recommend that, the executor of your will, whoever your beneficiary is, it doesn't necessarily need to be your spouse or your child or whoever is like someone you feel is like immediately close to you. Sometimes they're not the best person. A, maybe because they're disorganized. B, maybe, if you have them making end of life decisions for you, maybe you feel like they might make an emotional decision versus what you ask them to do. Or maybe you don't want to put that kind of responsibility on them and you think someone else would be better. A lot of times with like advanced care directives, people end up choosing um, a friend or a cousin or someone who's a little bit more removed so that they can just follow the directions versus, kind of having their own personal crisis about it.
Um, this is like a different kind of a little bit off topic, but I think a lot of, as a grief therapist, I'm always kind of thinking about how this stuff um, impacts the grief process, and so I'm always curious about grief itself. What was your experience when your dad died of, obviously you were really young, but it was also a different time. And I think even just 15, 20 years ago, the grief support world was really different. What was your experience and like what were the messages you got about grieving and being allowed to grieve? And
Mhm. Yeah. I also am seeing that people are saying I'm hard to hear. Is it better now? I was trying to fix the audio.
I hear you fine.
Okay. All right, great. Well, let me know if it becomes a little bit muddier again. But in terms of my experience in the messaging, so it's evolved dramatically over time.
Mhm.
When my dad first passed away, um, I've since learned that it's pretty common for like 9 and 10-year-olds to like snap back pretty quickly. But
Mhm.
I went from being at my dad's funeral to wanting to go have a sleepover. And I think it kind of freaked my mom out of just being like, she doesn't even seem like upset. She's just trying to go back to her normal life. And I've reached out to somebody and they were like, no, like with kids, like, they seek normalcy. They try to just like find their routine again and that it'll probably come up later, which is exactly what happened, where I really quickly just tried to, I was like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't need to talk to anyone. I just want to hang out with my friends and go to school and like have that be that. And it wasn't until I was in college that I really started to actively feel that loss. And I think it was being removed from home and being in an environment where I wasn't surrounded by family or support anymore.
So
And
interesting. I see that all the time. I work with so many people who've lost a parent because I have. And so they kind of find me through that avenue. And what I see is those who've lost parents in childhood or adolescence often have this second grieving experience in their 20s and 30s. And some of it is, like you say, like you're kind of away from home for the first time and out of that environment. But sometimes I think it's just we're not fully developmentally capable of really grieving until we're into our 20s. And there's this whole other kind of experience of it and understanding of what it was you lost and how it impacted your life.
yeah, absolutely. And when I went through that like real grieving experience, I mean, I don't think people really knew how to handle it. I was at a large university and I went to the counseling center and I mean I can say with like full clarity and certainty that I was not suicidal. However, the mental health professionals there, I think they were so concerned about liabilities that they really just didn't want to engage.
Mhm.
And so they just immediately, I had one session And they immediately said to me, you should go on leave for the semester, come back next semester.
Wow.
And I called my mom, and of course,
What year was this?
this was in 2008.
Okay.
And yeah, and so yeah, they just really didn't want to touch it. And so luckily my mom was very supportive, and she was like, whatever you need, like, come home, we'll find you a therapist, we'll sort out school, like, don't worry about it. Which was very, very lucky, because I know that would not be the case for a lot of people. And ended up also just having a bad chain of therapist experiences, just people who didn't really, they didn't know grief, they hadn't really studied it. I mean, I'm sure, Claire, this probably drives you wild, is how many people say they work with grieving patients, but have
I've
like
never
no
gone through grief.
no
Yeah.
experience, no
Yeah.
certifications, no,
I
it's
know
just
I had
like
a teacher
it's
like
like
that
a
in grad
box to
school.
tick. Yeah.
The one like grief and death and dying course that I took in grad school was taught by someone who had never lost anyone. And I just felt like I was just so like boiled up about it in there.
Yeah.
And it was really what drove me into this field. Just, there's so many misperceptions about grief, and people are afraid to touch it often. I think that's been one of the positives of this last year of COVID, is that I think we have really had to have, our cultures had to recognize that, a lot more about grief, how to support it, all the different ways we can go through loss and grief, and just kind of really rise up. And I'm hopeful that people will have more permission to grieve, and it will be more accepted, and there will be more resources. It's changing a lot. There's incredible resources out there now that weren't there even 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I same page with Lantern. I mean, for the beginning of our journey, we were always called like a very niche product, which is like kind of hilarious when you think about the fact that it's like the one thing that affects everybody. And they're always like, oh, it's a very niche experience, a very niche concept. I'm like, yeah, it's Marty, I can see your face. I'm like, I love your reaction. But I did want to close out that what we were just talking about with, there is like a light at the end of the tunnel here. It wasn't just like a series of bad things and then here we are. What I ended up finding was an organization called Experience Camps, which is,
Oh yeah, I've seen you write about this. Tell us
yeah,
about that.
yeah. So it's a children's grief organization. It's a free summer camp for children who have lost someone close to them. And I found out about it through a board member. I'm now a board member there as well, in 2014. And I kind of went into it really not knowing what to expect, but I was, very volunteering oriented. And so I was like, sure, why not? Let's give it a go. And it turned out that it was the best like grief related community I could have ever found. Like, just, I mean, the kids obviously are all there for that purpose, and many of the adult volunteers have also lost someone. And it's an environment, I mean, the way that we describe it is, it really, for people that are familiar with like the dual process model of, kind of ebbing and flowing between grief related activities, and then sort of like your normalcy, your fun, your whatever it is, and going back and forth between the two. That's what camp does, is it allows you this environment where you can both grieve and play at the same time. And which really allows kids and also adults to realize that, like, grieving is not this like boxed in period where you're sad and you can't do anything and nothing brings you joy, but instead, you could be really upset in the morning, and then a friend goes for a walk with you and you feel a little more hopeful, and then you laugh at something later in the day. It's like, that's how it goes. But I was able to find this network of people literally ranging from like age 9 to 75, who can deeply relate. And
That's
I'm
amazing.
madly in love with it. It's the best therapy I could have ever imagined.
Oh, that's so amazing. Maybe Zubin can put a link in there to the experience camps. Stephanie has a question here. She says, so glad grief is being talked about, switching gears a little. Thank you for creating and sharing Lantern. I think the site is wonderful. As an elder end of life coach and consultant, I would love to utilize with clients and share as part of ongoing resources. Is there a best way to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just for the sake of time, I'm just going to put, and anyone can email me anytime. I'm just going to put my email in here, but let's talk. There's a bunch of great ways you can do that, and happy to help navigate that. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think it's really something that could start to be incorporated into so many different places, so that when you are in the hospital with your loved ones getting that terminal diagnosis or whatever's happening, you're not scrambling around to start this process. You've put some things in place, and I'm hopeful that that is another positive that will come out of COVID, is people starting to really think about this a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, and just feel like it's okay to plan, and that it's not making a statement on anyone's condition either. I think that a lot of times when you have a family member who has a terminal diagnosis, you don't want to bring it up because you don't want to be the one to suggest that you need it. It's like it's a very strange dynamic of not wanting to bring up the topic. But I think having things set up online with Lantern, I think the best use of it is to encourage conversation and to give prompts and to kind of take the onus off of anyone to have to bring it up or say, I'm wondering about this, but instead be like, we have this account and these are the questions that this account is asking me. It's not you asking somebody personally.
Yeah. So we're you guys are welcome to add in more questions, or if you want to raise your hand and ask Liz anything directly. But I'm wondering, just thinking about this last year and people who are going through loss during COVID, it's been such a difficult time on so many levels to go through loss during this last year and during the pandemic. What have you noticed about that, or what ideas do you have for ways people can support either someone they know who's grieving, or if they themselves are going through a loss right now during this difficult time when we can't be gathering, we can't be holding funerals, I mean, all of this that we all know about.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of supporting someone, we have a lot of resources on Lantern about how to be a support, even from far away, they're available and accessible for free to anyone on our website. But I would say, like, reach out. That's like the biggest thing I've really noticed during this time is there's a lot of, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say, I'm just not going to do anything, or I don't, am I going to remind them of their person or what happened? And I'm always just like, first of all, like, they're thinking about it. Like, you're not going to remind them that this thing happened. And even if you don't know what to say, you can just say, I'm thinking of you, I'm there, I'm here for you. No need to respond. But just letting them know that you're there, because I mean, I've heard this so many times too, is you don't remember when you're grieving and you kind of you're a little bit more clear headed. You don't really remember exactly what anyone said to you unless they said something like horrible, but as long as, but
you always remember the horrible things people
Yeah.
say to you when you're grieving.
Yeah, you don't remember, the specifics anyone said to you, but you do remember if someone doesn't reach out and they don't say anything and they
True.
weren't there or available. And so, yeah, just reaching out and checking in and saying, no need to respond, no need to call back, just want you to know I'm here.
Yeah, you can even say, like, I don't know what to say, but I'm
Yeah.
here, I love you,
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite grief resources out there? I think you guys have some on your website too. Like, where do you send people
Yeah,
for?
I have so many. I mean, we work really closely with Elisa Forneray.
Love her.
Yeah, I was like, I know you've worked with her too. But she's just absolutely fantastic. Her writing is incredible. She's got an amazing newsletter, the Morning Herald. She's just really brings a fantastic sort of voice and tone. Love Modern Loss, love Refuge and Grief. There's a lot of like really like powerhouse women in this space.
But I mean, it's
voices.
incredible. There was none of this when I was like 18 and going through it. I felt like I was the only person in the world who'd lost a mom, and now there's so much amazing stuff out there.
Yeah, there really is. A Grief Coach is another amazing one. It's just like an SMS based grief support. Yeah, I mean, there are so many amazing things happening and evolving. And I think what I really love about the ones that I just mentioned is grief is not like a one size fits all situation. And I love that these individuals and many others that are taking their own voice and their own tone to it, whether that's cursing a lot and being really like irreverent, or it's being very serious and very clinical, or and there's something for everyone, and a voice and a person that you can relate to in the way that suits you best.
Yeah, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there was just a lot of grief books written by like older white men, and like that did not represent everyone's experience at all. And I think there's been just so many more just voices, like you said, that let us grieve all the different ways we need to grieve. There's no exact way to do it. So, well, I cannot thank you enough for the work that you do. And I am just so grateful that this is out there. I hope everyone who's listening today just gives some thought to your end of life plans. Go check out Lantern. Just start thinking about like who would you appoint to be the person to do this? What are some basic things to put in place? Do that Facebook thing. Just do like one thing today, you know? And just remember that it really is a gift. Even when it's hard, it's tedious, it's emotional, it is a true gift to do this for the people who are going to be left behind, grieving you and sorting through all your stuff. You know, Liz, do you have any final words you want to offer everybody?
Just a thank you for taking the time, and for many, I think, in the middle of your day to talk about this topic. And it is, it's a challenging one, but I think the more we exercise that muscle, the more we're able to support ourselves, support each other. So just thank you, thank you. I did put my email in the chat, liz@lantern.co. If anyone has any questions or ideas or just wants to say hi, I'm available.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Liz. Thank you to Reimagine and Zubin for being here today. And I can't remember if we have someone next week, but there's a whole really great lineup coming. Maybe Zubin can put in the chat of all the next Holding Space guests that we have coming. There's a bunch of really great conversations ahead in the next couple of months, and I hope to see you guys back here. Thank you again. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody.